Well, we are getting to the point now where we have to do some support systems inside the boat so that we can have some seats, because it'd be really uncomfortable without them. So we need to put in seat risers, and in some case seat knees, and we'll talk about the seat knees a little bit later. First, let's worry about the main riser. The riser in here is 3/4 by 1 inch. On this particular boat, it's the same stock that I made the gunnels out of, right? So we've got to be able to bend around and stick this to the boat, and we used virtually identical methods of doing that we did for putting the gunnels on. The only tricky part is it's down further on the boat. Now this particular one is down about a little over 4.5 inches from the underside of the gunnel, a little over 5.5 inches from the actual shear line itself. And all those measurements and instructions should be on your plans. Especially if you got your plans from us, it should definitely be on there. And what I've done on our plans from Sandy Point is at the intervals for the forms, I tell you how far down it is. So if you stapled your boat, then this becomes really easy because you can still see the staple marks in there if you look closely enough. So I know exactly where those measurements are. And I also know that I am going from, in this case, from below 5 to down here to 1, and I am putting one single riser that goes from one end to the other of those. And then I have separate set of rising systems that we'll be putting in the stern seat. And it doesn't flow very well with this. That's why we didn't carry it all the way to the end, because it actually changes the angle of that seat. All right, now, for those of you who have gotten DVDs before from us or plans from before, you know that I am not a frivolous guy, and I hate making people go out and buy tools, especially for building a boat. I'd rather do it with stuff that you have. And that's why during this DVD, you saw that we're using basically stuff that you can get from Home Depot or Lowe's or places like that. We don't fire up the big tools because you don't have the big tools at home. So I will tell you, this is probably not something that you have in your garage, and this is a deep well clamp. That this particular one goes to 12 inches, right? So you have to be able to come over the gunnel, come down, and clamp that in place. They're not that expensive, but obviously they're not sold everywhere either. It's kind of a unique item. So you got to put them every 6 inches. This is 8 feet here, so you need about 15, 16 of them just to do this riser. Now, if you don't want to do that, the next option will be to make your own. Now, I have another website that Sandy Point Boatworks maintains, and it's called intheboatshed.com. And on that website, you'll see basically instructional type things. Videos on how to weave a seat, make a web seat, videos on doing special shear strakes. And there's also a video up there of how to make your own deep well clamp. Now, all this is scrap wood that we had hanging around the shop. This particular wood is Purple Heart, so this is a really expensive clamp. And it's got a hinge on one end with a piece of, not threaded rod, but this is a carriage bolt that's bolted through, and nut and lock washers. And all you do is you open it up, drop it down the way you need it, and then you just tighten it up. And when you get it snug, then you take a box wrench and go ahead and tighten that right on there. All right, so this will do the trick. Now, I tell you in the video online that you have to basically make them for each project that you're working on. This is an inexpensive way to do it. You can get some, really inexpensive hardwood. You can use red oak from your local big box store, or whatever. Or if you just have scraps hanging around the bin, it'll work just fine. Now, without going into a long dissertation on Fulcrum's law, basically here's what you need to know. The further down that this point is here, closest to the clamping point, and the further away that it is from the pivot point, the stronger the clamp you're going to get, right? So if I was actually making these clamps for this project, or if I were to modify this particular clamp for this project, I would take and move this carriage bolt down about 3 inches so that it was just above the gunnel line here. All right, so I mean, think about it if this was some, let me see, let's say this was tongs that you were using on your grill and you were picking things up with it. If I use those tongs and I squeeze them from here, I get a certain amount of pressure here. But if I take those same tongs, put the same amount of pressure down here and squeeze something, I'm going to get a whole different result, right? I'll just squish that hot dog right through if I do it from here, where from here I'd just be able to pick it up, okay? So that's the whole idea behind Fulcrum's law. You move this down as close as you can to the pinch point and give yourself some distance from the pivot point, and you'll get a much stronger clamp down here, all right? So you can go to that website, intheboatshed.com, and if you can't find it, let me know, and we'll point you to it. But that'll show you how to make these, which is probably certainly going to be a lot less expensive than buying a set. All right. Now, do they work as well as the ones you buy? Yeah, I mean, pretty much, as long as you make them for your specific project, right? Okay. So that being said, the last thing I want to tell you before we get into actually doing this on the other side of the boat is remember you are working on a fiberglass boat with a cedar strip hull, which means for clamping pressure, I know I've said this 3 or 4 times, clamping pressure when you're gluing up using epoxy, you're not looking to do the same thing as yellow glue. You're not looking to squeeze the life out of it so that all the glue is rushing out, right? That works really well for yellow glue, does not work really well for epoxy. You are looking to get a nice snug fit. So when we put our clear epoxy on the inside and on the boat, and then we come back and put our thickened epoxy on the seat riser, and then we put it in there, when we crank it down, we are cranking down enough so that it begins to ooze out the sizes. That means we're making good contact between the seat riser and the side of the boat. That's all you need to do, right? If you crank down too hard, you will damage the outside of your boat, right? So don't do that. I mean, you know, there's a lot of pressure on these here. All right, well, that's all I've got to say here in prep work. One thing that I should have told you when we were doing the breast hook, which came out beautifully, by the way, is you need to make sure that your boat is spread apart to the way that we designed it here, right? Or whoever it is that made your designs. I remember to say this in when we're teaching people how to do canoes, because when you take canoes off the mold, they flop in and they flop out, and they're really kind of move back and forth until you get everything stationary. This boat here, when I took it and I measured it from one side to the other, it was perfect. It was right exactly where it should be. So what I'm talking about is, when I look at this form line here, I took a tape measure and went from one side of the shear to the other side of the shear and made sure that it was, according to the plans, the exact same width as the actual form itself, and as it turned out, it was. Now, don't get crazy about this. If it says it's supposed to be 52.5 inches and it's 53, fine. You're all set. Don't get crazy about it. But if it says it's supposed to be 52.5 and it's 56, yeah, now you got to do something about it. And all that means is you need to take a, if it's flared out, just get yourself some cargo straps, ratchet it up, bring it back into where it's supposed to be. If it's flared in, which can happen, you just cut a piece of 2x4 or whatever to the width it's supposed to be and pop it in there. And what that does is it sets the boat to the actual shape that it's supposed to be before you put on your breast hook, right? Because once the breast hook's on there, flexing it in and out, particularly as you get closer to the breast hook, becomes really, really difficult. But this boat was perfect, and that's why I forgot to tell you before we put the breast hook on. Yeah, so I'm telling you now. Okay, I'm going to spin this boat around, and we're going to put this seat riser in pretty much like we put the gunnels in, but I'm going to show you how we measured it down and all that kinds of stuff. All right, let's do that. Okay, now the plans tell me that from this particular form on the boat up to one that I have marked up there, I need to be 4 5/8 inches down. Now, in order to be kind to you as a designer, we do that measurement on the curve, okay? And when I say on the curve, that means you need to get yourself a flexible ruler, right? And we're going to measure up to underneath the gunnel, and we're going to come down 4 and measure 5/8 and make a mark right there, okay? So a couple of things here. The flexible rule is important because, you know, as a designer, I could give you, you know, straight lines, much less accurate, because then you're wondering, you know, one inflection point and all that kinds of stuff. And then you have to have a stick that actually does that. So we measure on the curve, right? So bend that in, take your measurement. Also, the actual measurement on plans is 5 5/8 down from the shear line. All right, so I'm doing that 4 5/8 because I know that I have a 1-inch gunnel here, inner gunnel. Now, the reason we don't give you measurements from the underside of the gunnel is because you may have 1.5 inches, you may have 2 inches, you may just be different. So it's easier for me as a designer to give you a measurement from the shear line down, and then you just deduct whatever it is from the gunnel. So again, the plans say 5 5/8, I got a 1-inch gunnel, I'm measuring down 4 5/8 and making a mark, all right? And I am just going to do that all the way down. So we'll mark at 4 5/8. Mark at 4 5/8. And keep going. Now, the good news for me is as I'm doing this, I'm noticing that I'm coming pretty much to the same point on the same strip all the way down. Well, that means I must have done something right when I was stripping, and my shear line must be good and straight. 4 5/8. All right, so don't be afraid to put in an extra. Okay. Now that I have all of those in, I'm gonna grab myself some painter's tape here, and I'm just gonna break off some little pieces. If I can get it. There we go. And I'm going to put it just above the line. There. And these will be in there all the way through the job, right through the clamp up. That way there I don't have to look for those little black pencil lines, which can get covered up very easily as you're working. All right. And after this, same as always, I'm gonna get some sandpaper. I'm gonna scuff up underneath there, inch and a half, because that epoxy is pretty much fully cured inside there by now. We did that about a week and a half ago. And like I said before, if you can't get a good chemical bond, make sure you get a good mechanical bond. Okay, one more left to do here. All right, in there. All right, so now I'm going to grab myself a little bit of sandpaper. And lightly scuff. Now you're not looking to break the fiberglass here. Just looking to scuff it up. Okay, good. Now I'm just going to take a brush, clean all that off, and then we're going to mix some epoxy. But the end game here is we need to take this and bend it right down around all the way to the end, following those blue pieces of tape. All right, so I still got one more piece of tape to put up on the end there that I missed. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna set the camera up high now. We're gonna get somebody up there high to look down on us, and I'm gonna get an extra set of hands because this is definitely a job easier done with 2 sets of hands. Okay. Okay, so I've got some clear epoxy here, and I have already painted epoxy on the underside of my seat riser. So it's setting into that wood as we speak. And remember, we do that because we like to give the epoxy time to saturate and sit into the wood. So we're going to give that a couple minutes to do that while I paint this on. Now, next thing I need to do is thicken this up just a little bit, because remember, still got kind of a rough surface in here, and we want our epoxy to fill all that as we're gluing it up. And if we thicken it up a little bit, it will do just that. And again, all I have is a very inexpensive chip brush here. Costs about 50 cents or so, maybe $1, and we throw them away when we're done. Now, if you made the mistake of putting your first seat riser on without considering the gunnels or anything like that, the golden rule that you definitely never ever want to break is whatever you do to one side, make sure you do it to the other side. You can always try to figure out a way to fix it if you have to. But it's one thing to have your seat an inch low. It's another thing to have it an inch low on one side and not an inch low on the other. So after you put your pieces of tape on and you're sure it's correct, make sure you double check that it's exactly the same as the other side, because that's the only thing that would be very difficult to come back from. Not impossible, nothing is impossible, but it would be difficult. All right, I'm gonna go thicken this up a little bit, paint it on the underside of our seat riser, and then we'll put it on. Okay, so the important thing here is that they are both the same. So what Cheryl's going to do up on her end is look across the boat and make sure that it's pretty much identical in positioning. And what I'm going to do is get somewhere towards the center here and push her down in and apply the first clamp. You can always adjust the clamp after it's on. The key to the first one is just get it set. Again, not too hard, just till you see it squeeze out, just like that. All right. Well, Cheryl must have done something right because we're pretty close down here. So I'm just going to continue on. So just make little adjustments as you go. Getting everything where it needs to belong. And again, remember, 1/4 inch seat of boat. Don't be cranking these down.